Welcome to Sisters in Crime Australia and Murder Mondays, when authors talk about their crime craft. I'm Karina Kilmore, a debut crime writer, a journalist and a national convener for Sisters in Crime, and we've been celebrating women's crime writing since 1991. Before I introduce JP Powell, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present. JP, or can I call you Judy?
You can.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us today. Judy, you've gone the long way around to reach the deadly world of crime writing. You're an archaeologist and historian by trade. You've worked as a high school teacher, an academic, a national parks officer, and a museum administrator. As well as leading archaeology projects in Australia, you have also excavated sites in Jordan, Cyprus and Greece. And all during this time, you've been constantly writing, including school textbooks, academic publications, government reports, and a biography. And in 2017, you were awarded a fellowship by the State Library of Queensland to research and write a World War II crime series. Judy, welcome. Before we get to the questions, can you please give us your elevator pitch for your debut novel, The Brisbane Line?
Okay, all right. Well, The Brisbane Line is about Sergeant Joe Washington, who's an American military policeman with the Criminal Investigation Command, and he's based in the South Brisbane Town Hall in Brisbane during World War II. And he's called to investigate the stabbing death of an American soldier whose body's been found in the South Brisbane Cemetery. And during that investigation, he understands why it is that General MacArthur called Brisbane the most corrupt place in the South Pacific.
Ooh, I love it. Okay, let's get on to our questions. Who are your literary inspirations?
Oh, God.
It's a hard one, isn't it?
Yeah, in terms of crime writers, I like World War II crime. I enjoy. I like Philip Kerr, who's Bernie Gunther is an amazing detective. Anyone who works for Himmler's got to be interesting. And I love Donna Leon. I always think reading a Donna Leon novel's like sort of sinking into a warm bath. You kind of know what's going to happen. Takes 5 chapters before he goes out for his first Prosecco of the morning. It's just delightful. I read a lot of non-fiction, actually. I've always tended to read non-fiction and kind of crime fiction. I'm not a great reader of high-end literary fiction, although I loved Richard Flanagan's Narrow Road to the Deep North. So I don't know, I read widely and varied, yeah.
Yeah, stunning book, that one.
Brilliant.
Does your main character ever surprise you?
Oh, God. I'm not sure. He's, yes, I think perhaps he's in some ways a sort of bland character. But he thinks a lot. He's a photographer. He's interested in photographs and photographing people. So he watches the world, and he doesn't really interact with it as much as observe it. But when push comes to shove, he was a boxer. So there's a kind of underlying anger there, I think. Yeah.
Wow, fabulous. What's the hardest part about writing a novel?
Oh my God. Well, finding the story, really, you know. I came across this. This is based on actually a real series of events and real crime files that came to me through a long, complicated series of events. I've never written fiction before. When I wrote the biography, I kept thinking, this story is so crazy it could be fiction, and wouldn't it be fun to do it as fiction? So I guess I was sort of interested in that. When I started to write this, much as I read crime fiction, it was hard to escape the research. Like, you do have to put it aside because it's a historical novel. You have to get the period right. You have to get the characters sounding right. But you do have to remember that nobody's going to read it just because they want to know about World War II Brisbane. So finding the story, and that was the challenge to me, I think. Yeah.
What is your writing routine?
Oh, lazy. I try to write every day, but I'm not very diligent. And, I hear people say that they write because, they're inside, they're pushed to write, desperately have to write. I have been saying to people recently that writing for me it's almost like extracting the last bit of toothpaste out of the tube. I'm not very diligent. I'm sure I'd be better if I were. Although I do think when you're not writing, you're still sometimes writing, like you're doing it in your head. But I do try to write. I'm not a nighttime person for writing. I write in the morning. But yeah, I'm not as conscientious as I should be.
Do you start with a plot or character or something else?
I started with actually a series of crime files, which were landed in my lap. So I started with a real event and some real characters. And then I had a whole series of things that I wanted to deal with. I didn't just want it to be about the crime. I wanted the layers of history in Brisbane in that period of time. And I'm not a good plotter. I'm really not. So it was difficult for me to put it all together. And some of it I didn't really know it was happening till the end. And it kind of, I hope, fell into place. I watched one of these Murder Mondays, and it was Anne Cleves, and I was so delighted when she said, I start with a place. And I thought, ooh, ripper.
Me too.
Yeah, I had a place that I wanted to write about. And that does, there are certain restrictions, therefore. It's the war, therefore certain sorts of people will be involved in certain sorts of ways. And because I guess I'm an archaeologist, I like the geography of it. So I walk around Brisbane thinking about what I'm seeing and how things could be. Yeah, so I did start with a place and an event, and then I had to create the characters to populate that place.
Yeah, yep. What's your top writing tip, and what's your top self-editing tip?
I think my top writing tip is not to be a prima donna. That makes sense. I've written various things, but this is my first fiction. And, I went to workshops, and you're never the best person in the class, but you're never the worst. And there's always something to learn, even if you don't agree with it, you learn something. I think you've got to be prepared to learn from others and listen to others, not necessarily be swayed by everyone's approach, but take from it something that suits you. My best editing approach is one that I don't follow, which is I should follow. I learned piano for a while when I was a kid, and the problem with learning music is that you can play the first 10 bars beautifully, but not the end, because you keep going back to the beginning. And I have a tendency to do that when I'm writing, and you shouldn't. You should plough ahead and get to the end. So I probably go over and over and over things rather than go on and on, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yep.
Don't go back over things too much at the beginning.
Are you a plotter or a pantser? I think we know the answer to that one, don't we?
Yeah, I'm trying to be more of a plotter because I think it just saves time. To be honest. I mean, really,
practical reason.
And I would like to be more of a plotter, but I think probably everyone's a bit of both. I don't think it's just a simple dichotomy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I start with an idea, I guess, even if it's the title, and I have a view, I have a vision of how it begins and how it ends. It doesn't actually have anything to do with the plot often, or the murder or whatever, but I kind of have an idea of the opening scene and the closing scene. But yeah, I maybe by the third book I'll be a plotter.
How do you write about sex?
Oh. Actually, to digress, there is a reason why I'm JP Powell. When I wrote the biography, I wrote it as Judy Powell. And when Brio were publishing this, David said to me, do you want to be Judy or Judith, or what do you want to be? And I said, well, I don't really want to be Judy Powell anymore, because the biography I wrote, which was actually about an archaeologist, was called, of all things, Love's Obsession. It's an odd title, but still, I don't really like the title. But it turns out there is another Judy Powell who lives in America and writes sort of erotica. And I've always wondered if someone bought a biography of an Australian archaeologist and thought this was not anything like I expected it to be. So that's partly why I'm JP Powell, because I don't write erotica. So you have to have, it's a crime novel. There's got to be sex a bit. But it's background. It's not central, So, yeah, I don't know that I do it that well, but it's part of the genre.
Do women write different crime stories to men?
It's interesting. There are a lot of female crime writers. And I don't know particularly why. I honestly don't know the answer to that. I wonder whether male writers write. Yeah, no, I'm not sure about that. I'm really not sure, because female writers have male detectives, and so do male writers. I'm not sure that there's always that much of a difference, to be honest.
Yeah. How much of a profile do you do for each character before you write?
I don't actually physically do it. Well, I did experiment with that a little bit and tried to sort of, write a sort of description. Well, not a description, write a little bit from their point of view. And I certainly have the backstory in mind, and they all have a backstory. They have to, because otherwise they're not human. But I didn't consciously put it together. And some of that backstory evolves as you write, it seems to me. I didn't necessarily know that Frank Bischoff grew up on a dairy farm, but, you know, he did, and that was useful.
Something I have in common with him.
There you go.
How do you decide the scene of a crime?
Well, in this instance, the crime, I knew where it... Well, no, I knew where the body was found. I didn't necessarily know where the crime had been committed, but I knew where the body was found, so I was restricted to that. And in fact, I mean, there are other crimes that occur in the novel, and most of them have their basis in some sort of fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea that the body's found in a cemetery. That appealed to me.
Yes.
And it also gave me a nice way to end the book, which, you know.
No spoilers.
Circular, yeah.
And our last question for today, how would you get away with murder?
Oh, God, I wouldn't be very good at it. But to get away with it, I couldn't do it, I don't think. Well, actually, I probably shouldn't say this, but I do have a family member who is a retired policeman, and he does say the only reason people don't get away with murder is they just don't dig deep enough. Which is a bit grim, but I'm sure very true.
Judy, thank you for being with us today on Murder Mondays.
Pleasure.